Hey kids, Flexing Teacher Weber here. I want to wrap up the equations we've looked at this week by looking at the 4 different kinds of equations we've looked at and then giving you some practice solving those. So there's 4 equations I have on the page right now. I want to focus in on number 1. It says solve the following by showing what you would do to both sides of the equal sign. So I'm going to focus in on number 1. Now remember, whenever you solve these things, you always focus on the variable. The variable in this one is x. And then look at what's beside the variable and think about what you need to do to isolate that variable or make that variable by itself, or what do you need to do to make that number beside the variable turn into 0. In this case, we have a plus negative 4. So think about what the opposite of plus negative 4 is. The opposite of plus negative 4 would be plus 4. And I write that on that side of the equal sign. Whatever I do to one side of the equal sign, I have to do to the other side. Plus 4. Now, minus 4 plus 4 goes away, and I'm left with x equals. I have a couple of integers here, negative 10, positive 4. The signs are different, so I subtract them. And since I have more negatives, the answer is negative. And if I was to go and replace having some trouble here. There we go. Replace the x with negative 6. Negative 6 plus negative 4 does equal negative 10. So when you have a subtraction beside the variable, you want to solve it by adding. Let's look at number 2. In number 2, the variable's on the other side of the equal sign. It's right here. And beside that variable is a plus 8. Well, the opposite of plus 8 is minus 8. And I'll do the same thing on that side of the equal sign. Keep everything lined up. Negative 5 and negative 8 make negative 13. Positive 8 and negative 8 make a 0, and I'm left with equals n, which is exactly what I want to be left with. So when you have an adding equation, you solve it by subtracting. When you have a subtracting equation, you solve it by adding. You always do the opposite. Over here in number 3, we have a multiplication equation. 4 multiplied by some number x equals 7 2/10. To solve it, since it's multiplying, you divide both sides by 4. Make sure you make a fraction. Now, we might need to do a little long division here to solve this. So I'll just go over to the side. There's a decimal in the answer right there. 7 divided by 4 is 1. 1 times 4 is 4. And 7 subtract 4 is 3. Bring down the 2. 32 divided by 4 is 8. 8 times 4 is 32, and there is no remainder. So when we divide both sides of the equal sign here, we get 4 divided by 4 is 1x, and 7 2/10 divided by 4 is 1 8/10, or x equals 1 8/10. When it's multiplication, you solve by dividing. And in the last question, y divided by 3 equals 2 4/10. You could also think of this as 1/3 y, because there's a 1 in front of that y, even though we don't see it. Since it's a divide by 3, we're going to solve it by multiplying by 3. please use parentheses to show multiplication. Multiply by 3 there, multiply by 3 there. Now I have a 3 on top of a fraction, a 3 on bottom. They divide away and I'm left with 1y equals 2 4/10 times 3. Well, I might need to go work this out on scrap paper. 3 times 4 is 12. Carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. And 2/10. So 1y equals 7 2/10, or y equals 7 2/10. These 4 questions summarize the one-step equations you have to know. When I say one step, it means you solve them in one step. I'm going to give you some questions to practice, and then you're going to have a little test near the end of the week. It's really important you show all your work because each question will be worth 2 marks. 1 mark for showing what you do to both sides of the equal sign, and 1 mark for the correct answer. Hope that helps. Make sure you try the review assignment. Flexing Teacher Weber, out.